So thank you, Brittany, and hello, everyone. I'm Camelia Cantor, Associate Director of the Huck Institutes at Penn State University. I'm what you might call a hybrid, part faculty, part research administrator. I spent 11 years as a full-time faculty member. And just as a heads up, my background is geography and business. So you will hear some geography references during this webinar. For the past 8 years, I've been deep in the world of research administration, program evaluation, and strategy development, where I still wear my faculty hat, just a bit on the sideways now. I'm also the principal investigator of the NSF-funded Skill Training in Administration and Institutional Research, or STAIR, the acronym. And honestly, thinking about the acronym, what's a better acronym for building capacity than a staircase, right? Just a step at a time, and sometimes also holding into the railing. This webinar is part of STAIR and of course Catalysis as well, as Brittany mentioned, and is partially funded by the NSF. I'm excited to be here with my STAIR collaborator, Dr. Fadi Castronovo, who serves as the STAIR program evaluator and brings his own unique expertise to the project. So Fadi, I'll hand it over to you for your own introduction.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Fadi Castronovo, as Dr. Cantor mentioned. I am an external evaluator for Castronovo Educational Assessment and Evaluations. I've been an external evaluator for NSF projects for the past 5 years. Prior to that, I was a senior lecturer in the built environment at the University of Brighton in the UK. And also prior to that, I was an assistant professor of engineering at the University of California State East Bay. And I have been working in an evaluation, as I mentioned, for the past 5 years, working in projects such as REUs, IUs, and also MRSACs. So working in not only in programs that work directly with students, but also big centers that support research. And I look forward to talking to you all about some of the innovation practices that I run in my practice.
Thank you, Fadi. So today we're offering what we like to call a crash course in program assessment and evaluation. So don't worry, we won't test you at the end unless someone from the assessment world insists, in which case it'll be a multiple choice and open book, we can assure you. Assessment and evaluation can be very complex, but our goal is to break it down into practical, valuable insights, especially for those of you navigating the world of grant development. That's our lens today, looking from both the faculty and perspective. So just a quick heads up, if you're hoping for a deep dive into student assessment with learning outcomes and classroom rubrics, this isn't that webinar, but you're really welcome to stay, and we'll try to keep it lively. There's plenty of training out there on educational assessment, but there's a surprisingly lack of support, especially in the training world, when it comes to how we assess programs, those big, strategic, often interdisciplinary initiatives that grants are built around. So here's what we will cover today. These objectives are that we're going to go over include the key components of a competitive assessment plan. We're going to talk about how to innovate in assessment, and Fadi here is a real expert in that. We're going to talk about how to integrate assessment seamlessly into your proposal, trying to go beyond traditional educational matrix, and we'll end up with a few common pitfalls and how to avoid them, also emphasizing how we could leverage external evaluation. So let's start with one of the most frequently confused pairs in the world of program design, assessment versus evaluation. So when you look at these two terms, and we're going to probably kind of stick to assessment throughout the presentation, but we wanted to make sure that there's no confusion between these two terms. So when you think about evaluation, and because we're from Penn State, I'm going to make a comparison to games. Could be any game, no football game, any game. So evaluation is like the final score at the end of the game. It documents what level of achievement has been reached. Did we win? Did we lose? Sort of a tie. Whereas assessment is really more like a coach's notes during the game. It's focused on how are we playing, what's working, what's not working, what to adjust before the next match. And it's about learning and improving, not judging. So assessments are not supposed to be judgmental. Good assessments are constructive, non-judgmental, and also forward-looking. They're not trying to say you failed. They're trying to say, here's how you could do even better. And you have here an example of, while evaluation may indicate that a project met its goals, assessment is needed to explain exactly what worked and why. Therefore, in this slide, we kind of have a table showing a side-by-side comparison. So let's say an evaluation tells you that your project met all of its goals. That would be wonderful, right? But assessment digs deeper and tells you why it worked. Was it the team? Was it the strategy? Was it the snacks at the team meeting? I don't know, maybe. Without assessment, you're celebrating a win, but not sure how to repeat it. So let's dive into kind of get an impression of what are your feelings about assessments at this point. So Brini going to run a poll.
Okay, thank you to all who participated. It looks like we are torn between love it, data is my jam, and a necessary evil, but I get it for the first question. And the go-to method for assessing a program seems to be mixed methods for 52% of our audience.
Awesome. Interesting. We love people who love data, right? That's definitely the assessment jam. So let me move to the next slide. So let's talk about the key components of a competitive assessment plan that kind of makes reviewers say, wow, they really thought this through. So at the heart of any strong assessment plan, there's two main types, formative and summative. And probably everyone here on the call are familiar with these two. Think of them like this. Formative assessment, and this is where my geography comes into place, is your GPS while driving. It helps you make adjustments in real time so you don't end up in a ditch. The summative assessment is the final report card. Did you get where you meant to go, or how bumpy was the ride? But we just cannot stop here. A solid plan should flow through a series of essential building blocks. Therefore, it's important that we have clear goals and objectives. If you don't know where you're going, no assessment will help you get there. Key performance indicators, KPIs, these are your mile markers. They help track progress and signal when to celebrate or recalibrate. Evaluation matrix and data collection methods. This is where the rubber meets the road. What are you measuring? How often? And with what tools? And of course, very important is it's identifying your key stakeholders. Who are you doing this for? Who needs to be involved? Who gets a say? And spoiler alert, it's not just your leadership. And finally, the feedback loop for continuous improvement. Because assessment isn't a one and done, it's a cycle, like laundry, but maybe just with fewer socks. So together, these components not only strengthen your grant proposal, but they actually help you run your program better. And that's the kind of assessment that plan really helps the proposal stand out. Now, moving forward, it's like, who's responsible for programmatic assessment? So the short answer is really everyone, all of us, everyone involved in grant writing and implementation of a grant. The longer answer, it starts, of course, with the PI, but it doesn't stop there. He's the real cast of characters. So the PI sets the vision, leads the change, and hopefully remembers where the logic model is saved. There's a project team who contributes to the tracking progress, implementing activities, and also collecting useful data, not just those pretty kind of data. Stakeholders that we mentioned before, think participants, partners, community members, everyone who can provide essential feedback that can keep your program grounded in reality and provide that feedback loop that we're going to mention soon. Evaluators or assessment consultants will help you organize assessment, design the framework, collect and analyze the data, and help you tell the story. And finally, there's also program officers at the granting agencies. They may not be in the trenches, but they're reading your assessment plan with a highlighter and a critical eye. So it's important to make sure that you showcase what you're trying to achieve and how did you get there and what's the next step in the process. So bottom line, assessment is not just a one-person job, it's a team sport. And now I'm going to pass it over to Fadi to talk about goals and objectives alignment.
Thank you, Camelia. So now that we have briefly discussed the key components of an assessment plan and the roles and responsibility of the programmatic assessment, we can discuss one of the major components of the program, which is goals and objectives. Now, goals can be defined as brief but overarching statements, just the big, wide statements that clearly define what the organization wants to achieve or is going to achieve. Meanwhile, the objectives are more like target tasks and deliverables and the activities that will help achieve those goals. So you can think of the goal statement as the foundation or groundwork required for success that is supported by smaller building blocks that are the objectives. So just think about each objective is building towards a larger goal. This means that the alignment between objectives and goals must be clearly defined and clearly aligned, right? And if the objectives are clearly aligned to the goals, then you're going to be successful in achieving those goals. One thing here that I wanted to mention is a quote by Lieutenant General Russell Honoré, where he explains that the programmatic leader should really focus on the development and tracking of the programmatic goal and vision. Meanwhile, your program managers, they are going to be the working in the trenches on achieving the objectives, right? Of course, this doesn't mean that the leader shouldn't be involved in tracking the overall objectives, but it's just to think about that the leader should be looking at the bigger picture. We can go to the next slide. So let's look at an example of a goal and objectives. Here we have an overall goal on the left, which is to establish the Pennsylvania network to support public health emergencies with routine environmental surveillance. Now, to achieve this goal, you can see right below, there are 3 objectives that are proposed to support that overall goal. These objectives can be used to develop the programmatic evaluation outcomes and measures, which you can find on the right. If we look at the first objective, for example, which is developing a comprehensive after action review, for this objective, we have both outcome measures, which were developed, but also as well as activities and the processes that we need to take place in order to not only measure, but also to track that we are meeting the objectives. One thing that I would like to point out here is that both the objectives and the activities start with a verb, and that is because they indicate an action. They need to indicate something that is going to be taking place in order to achieve not only the objective, but then overall the goals. It's best practice to include also the responsible personnel that will be championing the tasks. And this, especially as a programmatic leader, is going to be important to understand who's going to be either the managers or the evaluation supporting staff that is going to help achieve those tasks and when they should be achieved by. So you can see also a timeline there. Now, this helps leadership understand who's going to be responsible for that task and the management to keep track of when the task is supposed to be completed by. Now, the form that you're seeing here was a form that the CDC expected to be filled out at the end. So you have to think about when you are developing your own work plan or your own evaluation plan or your own goals and objectives, how you are meeting the funding audience expectations and how you're breaking down your goals and objectives. Next slide. So if you need to start from somewhere, you can use the SMART objectives framework to develop objectives. Now, SMART objectives are an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And they are used for both planning and performance tracking. So specific, the objectives must be they must be clear and clearly defined, and they must be focused. And you can ask questions that we listed for you on the left in order to make sure that they are specific. In regards to measurable, the next step is making sure that the objectives are quantifiable to track both progress. And this could mean that you're tracking both positive and or negative change inside of a project. And knowing which data can be used to track the change and how it will be collected is going to be really key in order to meet this component. Then we have achievable. We need to make sure that the objectives are realistic and attainable, and knowing how these objectives will be accomplished and what are the resources, especially, that are going to be necessary to accomplish is really, again, important. You may have to make sure that the objectives are relevant and they are specific and align with the broader goals. And then time bound. Just like we showed you before, you must keep track that you are meeting these objectives within a clear time frame. And there are different questions that you could be asking there as well. So for each of these, we added some questions that you can ask. So this framework is really helpful, especially to ensure that your goals are clear, actionable, and effective, and that you're developing objectives that support those goals. So next, Camelia is going to be talking about the assessment cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadi. So let's walk through the assessment cycle. This is a cycle of continuous improvement that should be your best friend in any programmatic effort. We tend to break it down into 5 core steps: create, plan, measure, analyze, and apply. Yeah, it sounds a bit like a productivity mantra, and honestly, it kind of is. So just thinking from a create perspective, we tend to start by defining the purpose of our program. What are you trying to change, improve, or accomplish? When you plan, you identify your tools, your timeline, and your stakeholders. So think of this as your prep phase. Do you have surveys? Do you have interviews? Do you want to do focus groups, mixed methods? Will there be snacks? Yeah, I'm probably hungry, so I keep talking about that. Sorry. And then the next measure. This is your data collection moment. Be intentional here. Collect what you'll actually use, not just what looks fancy on the graph. And I've seen so many situations, and I'm at fault sometimes as well, where we like to collect a lot of data because we tend to be pretty much data nerds. But we need to be very meaningful in terms of what do we want to measure and what type of data do we really need. Then it's analyzing. It's time to make sense of that data. So what's working, what's not working? Did something unexpected show up? And usually it's interesting that it's where something unexpected shows up, that's often where the gold is. Finally, you also have the apply. We like to apply what we learn through the assessment process. So this is where the real magic happens. Use your insights for course correction. No shame in changing direction mid-program. It shows that you're really paying attention and learning through the process. The purpose of all of this is really to monitor, evaluate how well your program is doing, especially from a proposal standpoint, many times that for the educational, the training, the outreach areas of a proposal, but also for the overall proposal. So you can stay accountable, pivot when needed, and ultimately create more impact. And yes, we've been all guilty of skipping the analysis step and going straight to applying what feels right. But trust us, your future self and your program officer in particular will thank you for closing the loop properly. So another objective for today was looking to how to integrate assessment seamlessly into your proposal. Because no one wants to be that person scrambling to write an evaluation section the night before the deadline, right? So here's a common myth. We'll just figure out assessment later after we get the funding. Well, nope. Reviewers see that coming from a mile away. The truth, real pros, build assessment from the beginning, like a secret ingredient baked into the right cake. But really not something that you sprinkle on top afterward, like powder sugar. So here's a simple formula for success. Clear goals plus measurable KPIs plus the right tools will lead to a strong reviewer-approved proposal. So think of assessment like your program's GPS, of course. Without it, you're just driving fast in a general direction, hoping it's toward impact. So knowing what to do next is really you have to leverage the key performance indicators. We're going to talk about these ones. And lately I've seen more faculty in particular and also research administrators looking into starting to gain interest in KPIs. So what are KPIs? These are your program's vital signs. The matrix that show if your initiative is thriving, not just surviving, or in need of some serious caffeine and course correction. So what makes a good KPI? Think of this checklist as your KPI survival kit. First, it needs to be measurable. So we did a great job, maybe lovely, but not a KPI. We need numbers, and I really loved that a good percentage of the people in the audience are numbers. They love numbers. Think percentages, frequencies, growth rates. Then it needs to be relevant. As I mentioned before, don't just measure what's easy to count. Measure what matters. If it doesn't tie back to your goals, toss it. Actionable. If the data you collect just ends up sitting in a set spreadsheet somewhere, it's just not doing its job. You want insights that drive decisions. Time-bound. Set clear timelines. Are you measuring monthly, quarterly, at the end of the century? Hopefully not. Balanced. Make sure you're tracking both. Outputs, what did you do? Outcomes, what actually changed because you did it. And think of it like this. If outputs are the ingredients, outcomes should be the taste of the final dish. So we have here a slide where we're trying to sort of help you connect some dots between 4 essential components of our assessment plan, the ones that I mentioned before: objectives, KPIs, matrix, and measurement tools. Think of them as, again, your assessment recipe. Each part builds on the other to create something fundable, trackable, and genuinely useful. And this is an example that I developed for a center proposal that actually ended up being funded. What I would like to really mention, and it's like, you know that your KPIs are bad when your best metric is the number of meetings attended instead of the actual progress being made. Remember, impact is very important when you do assessment. And these are a few examples of objectives that we used. And I'm going to jump to the logic model, because what good are KPIs, matrix, and tools if we don't know how they connect? When you look into this, it may be a little bit overwhelming. And yes, it's small typing, it's small writing. It's nicer, it looks nicer when you put in your final proposal. But it's an example that we wanted to share to give you an idea of the logic model. So think of it as your program's blueprint or your storyboard. It shows the cause and effect chain of your program, how your inputs and activities can lead to meaningful outcomes. Those outcomes could be short-term, long-term, medium-term. And trust me, reviewers love a good logic model. It's like a GPS for your project. So basic logic model structure would have inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and we don't have it here, but it's impact. When you put it together, you start from assumptions, and you also consider external factors, which means you really have to take into consideration a lot of elements. Sometimes I compare it to business where you do your SWOT analysis. it really kind of goes within those lines. So let's break it down. Inputs means resources you put into it, funding, staff, time, infrastructure. These are your ingredients. Activities, what you actually do, like workshops or trainings or mentoring or outreach. The outputs are the immediate products, like number of events, participants, publications that result from the project. Outcomes are short, medium-term results, could be long-term as well to some extent, which account for changes in knowledge, behavior, skills, or attitudes. And then you have the impact. The impact is the big picture, the broader change that you're contributing to the field, the community, or the society. So how does this relate to KPIs and assessment? Each stage of your logic model should be tied to specific KPIs and metrics. Those are what you'll assess to track whether your logic is actually playing out the way you planned. Your measurement tools will help collect the data along that chain. So I'll give a very short, brief example. If your activity is to host a STEM summer camp, your output may be the number of students trained. Your outcome could be increase in STEM career interest. And your KPI may be percentage of students enrolling in STEM majors 1 year later. So I'll stop with the logic model here and pass it over to Fadi to talk to you about innovation in assessment.
Great. Thank you so much, Camelia. So we'll discuss what are the different ways that you can evaluate and assess that go beyond traditional survey and interview, which are the most common ones. Now, just a caveat here, these methods that I'll be discussing are methods that are deployed in addition to traditional qualitative and quantitative methods. By no means I'm saying that you should remove traditional surveys or interviews. They are still extremely valid and essential and foundational in the process of evaluation and assessment. But the ones that I'll be talking about can help with engagement of the participants, but also can help you paint a bigger picture and capture more data that otherwise you might be missing. So the first tool that I wanted to mention here is interactive dashboards, which are visual collaborative platforms that allow users to interact with each other and co-generate answers. So my tool of choice is Miro, which is specifically functions kind of just like as a big, gigantic whiteboard. Um, and it's digital, of course. And the idea is here is to have multiple stakeholders. Now you could have students, or you could have research administrators, you could have faculty, and I'll give you an example in a minute, that could also be working together and collaborating to either answer an evaluation question or to plan the development of an evaluation plan and so forth. So it allows for that collaboration, which is really important. Now, there are other tools besides Miro, which is my favorite tool. And this could be either Miro, LucidArt. There's many different types of tools out there. I like Miro because it comes loaded with many different types of templates that can be easily modified. Next slide. So let me show you an example of how I use Miro to engage focus groups. And this is focus groups, meaning multiple, of both program leaders, of faculty, and graduate students, each individual focus group, to develop a survey that will then assess the entire program and then capture the programmatic success. So the program was delivering three major tracks: research, professional development, and community outreach. And first, I worked with the focus group of the program leaders, and I used, again, Miro to capture the current offerings, the success stories that they felt were coming out of the program, and also the future opportunities that they wanted to see. And I did that for each track. I repeated this project then also with focus groups of faculty and also focus groups of students. And this allowed me to kind of gain an understanding of how each group perceived success, perceived the current offerings, but also wanted to see future offerings to be, or future opportunities to be made. So it gave me an understanding how each of these groups, and then when I reported back to the program leaders, they could see how, there could be differences in between, but then also how they could help them kind of consolidate this viewings. Based on these focus groups, I then was able to develop a survey, and you can see that on the right, that could be then deployed program-wide. So not just with a small focus group of the students, but then a much larger quantitative method then allow me to capture all the participant voices. So let's go to the next slide. Another tool that we could use is artificial intelligence. Now, I know that AI is a controversial tool, and I don't disagree with many of the critics out there in terms of some of the critiques that AI, but it can be a really helpful assistant, especially in the evaluation process. Of course, the first step that I always emphasize is making sure that any work that you're doing with AI is approved by your internal review board or your IRB, especially if you're doing it for research or for publishing, and that you also address any concerns that the participants, whether it is a focus groups or interviews, have in regards to AI. Once that's taken care of, I have used AI to not only support my literature review to find validated assessment instruments and questionnaires and frameworks. Of course, this didn't substitute my own internal research and using, just general research in terms of finding all these validated instruments, but it's always good to kind of have an extra set of eyes that could, give me some suggestion in terms of what I might be missing. Another tool that AI produces is actually from Zoom, which is the platform that we're using, is the notes feature, which especially when I'm having calls with program directors or principal investigators, it gives me a great summary at the end of the call, which then helps me then kind of identify either things that I might have missed at any point, but then also plan next action items. Then from a interview and assessment perspective, Zoom and the Zoom AI feature comes with a transcription tool, which is really, really helpful for qualitative analysis. Of course, the transcription is not perfect, and so I always go back and clean it up. So I always make sure that the recording is correct. But then I also use this data not only to perform my own thematic analysis, but then I also have started experimenting with ChatGPT's features of performing thematic analysis and just kind of compare between what I do in terms of thematic analysis and what ChatGPT provides me of different themes that I might have identified. And while it's getting better, I still identify better themes, but it is a helpful way to kind of make sure that, I am getting, and maybe I'm not missing anything. So far I haven't missed any. And then in addition to the thematic analysis, you can also use ChatGPT's function to perform simple statistical analysis, such as frequency counts or even t-tests. So just really quick to, again, compare between what you do and have an extra set of eyes. So think of it as an assistant. Next slide, please. Here are some additional methods that we can be using. Case studies with narrative arches, for example, is a way of telling a story that follows an individual from their first interaction with a program. You might be capturing their challenges, their moments of growth, or eventual outcomes or eventual growth that comes out of participating in the project. And this can be done over multiple data points. So if you are doing interviews or focus groups, you can then kind of put together an individual and then build that case study with a narrative arch. Similar to that is the digital storytelling. Now, this can be really helpful, especially for funding sources. And if you want to put it on your website, recording a testimonial video of a participant. And again, capturing how skills might have been improved or kind of telling a before and after story and highlighting the key impacts that your project has had. And then this one, I've done a couple, but again, I did this with Miro, which is little block notes and little illustrations, kind of telling the day in the life of a stakeholder. In particular, it was students that were performing research. So kind of drawing and illustrating and building that together with narratives. So one way that an evaluator can develop a case study with narrative arches is by pairing it with social media. So if we go to the next slide, I also have done LinkedIn tracking of participants in a program and how their skills had grown from the beginning to the end of the program. And that could have been an addition of skills or just putting it on the curriculum that they participated or just illustrating that they have, grown through the project. And that is a tangible way to also show your funding sources that, they have an impact. So next slide. Just for fun, after we developed the slides for innovation and assessment, we also asked ChatGPT what are other tools that can be used, and there are a few that we might have missed. And this can be things such as gamification, so having badges or having competition. I haven't used that for programmatic assessment yet, but I'll be excited to try some of these, especially the badges part. And then also chatbots can be really helpful, especially if you're trying to do conversational surveys or automation of that process. But all to say that we're staying ahead of the curve or staying with the curve in terms of seeing that there are all these different ways that you can implement innovative ways to assess.
Time for another full break. So here we're only asking one question. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now, if you'll just take a moment to complete it. So how often do you tailor assessments specifically for each proposal? Looks like most responded as always or sometimes.
Well, that's pretty good, actually. It's exciting that a lot of the people in the attendance, I think it was about 60%, if I got it right, at least do some assessment. And if you're among those who don't do assessment, we're really thankful that you're part of this conversation. And you will realize, hopefully, by the end of the session, how important assessment is. So I'll continue this session by talking about the value of external evaluators or internal evaluators. Finding good evaluators, what I can tell you, is not easy. I'm really fortunate to work with Fadi on my proposal. It's really not easy. Think like dating, but for data nerds. You want someone who gets your logic model and doesn't ghost you at the reporting time in particular. So if you don't have the expertise in-house, which is okay, go external, and that's totally fine. External evaluators bring credibility and objectivity. And what I want to make sure that everyone, at least if there's one thing that you want to remember, it's like, it sounds weird, but don't be cheap. Because a strong evaluation can make or break your proposal. And if your evaluator is working for peanuts, your results might be peanuts as well. So it's really important to think of the value of the evaluator from the beginning. I also, when you select the evaluator, we have here an example, the ES evaluation capability framework that you could use to identify what kind of evaluation support do you actually need. So this is a good framework for you to go and say, utilize it to figure out what kind of evaluation, and that's going to help you in your conversation with the potential evaluators. So think of external evaluators not just as an add-on, but really a strategic partner who can help you move beyond traditional matrix and tell the real story of your program's impact. So finally, let's wrap up this session by talking about some of the most common pitfalls in programmatic assessment. And most importantly is really how to avoid them. connected to what I just said about evaluators, not engaging an evaluator early is really one of the biggest pitfalls. Too many teams treat evaluators like last-minute wedding guests, really invited only when the RSVP is already overdue. So how to avoid that? Ask, how can the evaluators support us during the grant writing? Identify someone strong early in the process, definitely not in the final week. Treat the evaluator like a core team member, not a budget line item. Very important. The second pitfall that we came out with is really engaging with the evaluator throughout the program life. How to avoid this is like, you need to ask how to maximize their knowledge, read the reports as they really provide some valuable feedback, and try to address feedback for continuous improvement. Those reports are not just paperwork, they often contain insights you can actually use. All right, then another is like not having a logic model. So we went through the logic model through the presentation. And it's really important to avoid not having one. You need to ask the type of inputs, the activities, the participants, the outcomes, prioritize clarity versus quantity, and try to connect your logic model to the narrative, to the intellectual merits, and also to the broader impacts of your proposal. And of course, different grant agencies will have different expectation and sections. So you need to make sure that you customize that logic model to their expectation. All right, so broken research or program golden thread. It's really looking to how to avoid this is, are the research program objectives, questions, and assessments aligned? Try to align the gaps with the objectives. Try to draw a path between the objectives and the matrix, and make sure that the matrix are actually measurable and you're utilizing validated instruments. All right, so this should be quite logical, right? Measuring the wrong thing. Everyone should have that as a priority. How to avoid that? You need to ask yourself, what kind of decisions will this data really help us make? Prioritize quality of the data collection versus quantity. Look into what can actually help us measure the depth of impact. And then use outcome-based matrix. How did knowledge or behaviors change because of our interventions, because of our program? And that ties into overdoing it, collecting too much data or maybe overly complex questions and not doing anything with it is really not going to help in decision making either. So to avoid that, there's three most important things we need. It's like really look into what are the three most important things we need to learn from this assessment. Focus on the KPIs that really matter. Set a clear path on how the data will be used, and regularly review and adjust the program, making sure that you have and you leverage the program, the feedback loop. Then only measuring after without the before. It's a challenge here. So usually when we get the grant, there's a time frame where we need to start implementation. And we also, if we are working with human subjects, the challenge is that we need an IRB approved. And sometimes we need to have action items, start the work, and the IRB is not approved yet. So it's very difficult really thinking from that perspective, how to measure certain things. However, from the assessment perspective, you still need to measure before, because otherwise it's really difficult to really understand how your improvement, how did you improve the program? Only relying on surveys and ignoring qualitative insights is also not ideal. Mixed methods tends to be the way to go lately, combining quantitative with qualitative data, using testimonials from the participants, and considering some tech-based assessments, some of which Fadi has been sharing with you. So this is the end of our presentation, and we're here to also respond to any questions you may have. I'll pass it back to Brittany as well to cover a little bit of the things that are coming, exciting things that are coming.
Hey, so as Camelia said, we're happy to answer your questions. So please feel free to submit those in the Q&A now, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can. While you take the time to enter your questions, I'd also like to point out that we'd love to hear your feedback about today's webinar. So the QR code on the right of this slide leads to a brief post-webinar survey. We'd appreciate your feedback. If you'd like to schedule a free initial consultation with Camelia, please reach out to Mindy Kane. Her email address is listed there and also in the chat that I just posted. And lastly, if you're interested in joining the STAIR subject matter group, please complete the form at the QR code listed at the bottom of the slide. Okay, and I don't see that we've received any questions just yet. So I have a couple for you all. What is or are the biggest misconceptions you see about programmatic assessment and grant proposals?
I'll take that one, Fadi, first, if you're okay with that. Okay. So the biggest misconception is, I think that assessment is just a compliance checkbox. I think this is something that on both sides, I think we're at fault, both faculty and research administrators. If the RFP says you need to have assessment, and we check a box when we have an evaluator, and something you tack at the end of the proposal and keep reviewers happy. That's sort of, I think, the biggest misconception, that we can do that and still be competitive in our proposals. But in reality, a strong programmatic assessment, it's strategic. It's really how you learn, how you adapt, how you gain, you understand what you're doing through the process, and you learn how to demonstrate your impact. It's not about proving you're perfect. It's about showing you're thoughtful, intentional, committed to learning and improving along the way. So I think this is one of the biggest things. It's considering treating assessment as an afterthought. And when it's treated as because when it's treated as a core part of the program design, then the reviewers will notice it too, and hopefully for the right reasons. I don't know if Fadi, you want to add anything to this, but
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Camelia. I was also going to add the understanding of the PIs. Sometimes I struggle with their confusion between what is an external evaluator and what is internal assessment or internal research. I get approached being asked, can you help us perform the research, which is different than programmatic evaluation? And then I have to say, well, I can't wear both hats because I need to be impartial in terms of as a programmatic evaluation. But if you want me, then I can then join and, help you evaluate from a research perspective. So, a lot of the times my first calls is kind of having to explain what is an external evaluator and what is my role as an external evaluator versus having the research questions. I, of course, while there is the drafting, and especially if they engage with me at the beginning, support and kind of give a critical eye, especially in the beginning, of that golden thread that Camelia was talking about, that making sure that the goals, the objectives, the research questions are all aligned. Because at the end, it does come down to the programmatic evaluation. And so I need to be able to say, okay, everything is aligned. Now I come in and say, these are the additional questions that I need to ask as an external evaluator. So really understanding the difference between the research and external evaluator, and then engaging, as Camille mentioned, from the beginning with the external evaluator. So then I can then help with the drafting as well of the project. So yeah.
Thank you. So it looks like we received some questions. First, if your program is funded and your assessment reveals the need to significantly change your program, how is that viewed by the PO? Is this expected? Is prior approval often required?
wow, that's a great question. hopefully no one gets to the point where they need to significantly change the program based on the assessment, because I would go back to the fact that maybe when the proposal was developed, there was no assessor part of the team to understand the implications. It really differs, and Fadi, feel free to interfere at any points. Like from my perspective, is it really depends on how much change, because you still need to follow your objectives, the initial ones in your proposal. So you have to deliver to your initial plan. And there's different proposals. Some of them, like cooperative agreements, they have a closer relationship with the program directors. You meet with them. There's adjustments based on feedback loop. It's a bit more of a closer relationship. But others, they are really looking to make sure that you're doing what you said you would be doing. So honestly, I hope that no one gets to the point where they realize, based on the feedback loop, that they need to make significant changes to the original plan. Some changes are okay, but significant changes will be problematic for your funding agency.
Yeah, I echo what Camelia mentioned, and I've been called into, into projects where they received the funding, but then they said, well, but you don't have an external evaluator. You need to have an external evaluator, or you need to develop an external evaluation plan. And there, it could be quite challenging because you are coming in without any ability to kind of understand what was the original thought, and being able to then draft a plan that the PO is going to be happy with. It's challenging, but at the same time, um, there's a load off that the funding has been approved already, but now you have to really make sure that the evaluation is going to be aligned to what the project said it was going to say, and then yeah, you want to make sure that the PO is going to be happy with that. Maybe having a call with the PO is going to be really important. I haven't had the chance where there was a need to do major revisions, but I have had opportunities where I was called in a project where there was an original external evaluator, and the principal investigators were not necessarily happy with the level of engagement, and then I had to come in and improve that engagement, especially with the participants. So I haven't seen where the plan needed to be drastically changed, but I have seen where, maybe a swap, and I had to bring in my own evaluation ideas as well.
Thank you. It looks like we might have time for one more question. Can you talk a little bit about assessments that are done before you even target interventions? For example, you know that there's an issue in a group, but you don't know what it is.
I can start if you want, Camelia. I was just gonna say that's where a qualitative evaluation is really, really powerful, and some of the tools and innovative tools that I mentioned can be really helpful, mainly because it helps with discovery. It helps with discovery and understanding what are, yeah, potential challenges that you have in a group, or things that might need to be improved. I've participated in a project where the project leaders clearly knew that the students did not even know that they were participating in the project. And so they had to kind of develop an identity, and kind of they said, we want to be able to document this. That is a challenge. So yes, you could definitely use the evaluation in order to then develop that a target intervention, and then also develop additional evaluations as well. So a first evaluation can be really, really powerful to kind of gauge what are the potential things that need to be changed. Um, and if there is an issue in the group. And qualitative and the interviews and the focus group, and also using Miro can be really helpful, because then you have, everybody putting ideas up, but then having, discussions about that.
Okay, and I think we can squeeze in one more question here. How much should be budgeted for assessment in a grant?
So it really varies, but what I've seen is 5 to 10%. In the past, it was really, so I would like to also clarify, there's external evaluators would be doing summative assessment, which means they might meet with you 4 times a year or less and look into and checking the boxes. And there's external evaluators that function more like internal evaluators who are assigned to your project at a higher, much higher effort. And those are really useful. And that's what I have Fadi in my case here, who actually really engage very closely. They don't do checkboxes, they do actual assessment, right? And in that case, you really treat them as like they're like consultants, and consultants have either fees, and Fadi can talk to me, but at least from a budgetary perspective, that's where I'm looking, 5 to 10%.
Yeah, I agree. That's usually the percentage, especially if you're looking at the checking boxes, that goes towards the 5, but then can get higher. But usually that's where it depends on the level of effort, and I gauge based on that.
Thank you both. So before we close, I just want to thank our speakers for sharing their expertise today, and to all of you for joining us. We hope this session provided you valuable insights to help you navigate programmatic assessment. So thank you again for being here today, and have a great rest of your day.